Across the wide sands of Kemet, where the Nile stretches like a green serpent through the desert, a strange stillness began to creep. At first, it was not noticed. The markets of Memphis still rang with the cries of merchants. The docks of Thebes still thundered with the songs of boatmen, hauling nets heavy with silver fish, and the temple still resounded with chants to Amun, Ra, and Osiris. Life appeared unchanged, yet beneath the sound there grew an absence, a hollow like a flute with one of its notes missing. It began with one or two who slipped away without farewell. A scribe left his stylus, mid-sentence upon the papyrus, and never returned. A potter abandoned his wheel, clay still wet upon it. A woman gathering reeds by the river vanished before sunset, leaving her basket half filled. At first these were thought to be wanderers, perhaps victims of crocodiles or desert raiders. But the pattern deepened. Each month more were gone. They left not in panic but in quietness, as though stepping through a hidden door. Those who vanished were not all of one kind. Some were learned priests who knew the language of stars. Others were common workers, women who baked bread, farmers who tilled the black soil after the flood. Yet all departed with the same invisible thread pulling them toward silence. Their households searched, their villages whispered, but no footprints marked their leaving. The first murmurs rose among the elders. Have the gods withdrawn their favor? Is this a plague of spirits? Yet no sickness spread, no wailing of pestilence echoed through the streets. The Nile still rose with the flood, the sun still gilded the temples. The absence was not of life, but of presence. One fisherman told a tale. My brother sat with me on the banks, mending nets. He spoke of a dream where Osiris called his name. When I turned to answer him, I found only the net lying on the sand. His place was empty, and the wind carried silence in his stead. Soon the markets noticed. Voices grew fewer, chants in the temples thinner. The air itself seemed heavier, as though the desert winds carried not just dust but the weight of unseen mysteries. Priests began to record the vanishings on scrolls, though they had no name for the phenomenon. They called it only the withdrawal, and so the first murmurs of silence spread across Kemet. Not the silence of famine nor of war, but of souls who had touched something eternal and could no longer remain among the noise of men. The markets of Kemet had long been the beating heart of the two lands. From sunrise, merchants laid out their wares, baskets of figs, honey jars sealed with clay, bolts of linen, oils fragrant with myrrh, beads of turquoise from Sinai, copper ingots hauled from Nubia. Their cries wove together into a great chorus of exchange, a music of barter and desire. But as the vanishings grew, that chorus faltered. First a handful of stalls were left untended. A jeweler known for his delicate work vanished, his shop abandoned with necklaces half-strung. A baker's oven cooled forever, its loaves left unbaked, the scent of dough lingering like a ghost. Then whole rows of stalls stood empty, as though a shadow had swept its hand across the marketplace. Those who remained tried to fill the gaps. A single voice called louder, straining to cover the absence of his neighbors. But the emptiness could not be hidden. The laughter of bargaining women echoed strangely against stone walls stripped of replies. Children who once darted between the legs of customers now stood still, uneasy, as though sensing a presence too vast for words. At first, suspicion fell upon Pharaoh's officials. Some claimed tax collectors had seized the missing, punishing debts unpaid. Others whispered of soldiers conscripting men for distant wars, yet no records confirmed it, and the silence of the vanished carried no sign of chains. Their houses contained no struggle, no blood, no forced departure, only absence clean and absolute. The priests of Ra argued with the priests of Osiris. It is the work of shadows, some declared spirits, rising from the desert to claim the living. Others countered, no, this is Osiris's call. These souls have seen beyond, and the world no longer holds them. The debates grew fierce, but none could deny that the markets dwindled day by day. One merchant cried aloud, his stall deserted of buyers. Better a famine of grain than this famine of voices. Grain can be replanted, but how shall we plant men and women once they have gone into silence? Thus the marketplace, once a flood of noise and color, became like the Nile in drought. Its stones bare, its channels running thin. The emptiness gnawed at the hearts of the people, though they dared not name it. For how does one name a silence that chooses its own? When the markets faltered, the temples felt the wound next. Each dawn, priests lit incense to awaken the gods, their chants echoing through vast colonnades. The rituals were precise, handed down through generations. songs to Ra as he rose, offerings to Hathor at midday, prayers to Osiris as the sun descended. Yet as the vanishings spread, the voices in the temples thinned. A chorus of 20 dwindled to 12, then to 7. Some priests vanished mid-prayer, their sacred words cut short as if swallowed by unseen hands. Whispers coiled in the shadows of sanctuaries. Some said that the gods themselves had grown weary of human lips, preferring silence over praise born of fear. Others argued the opposite, that the gods had chosen the vanished ones as vessels, drawing them into divine service beyond the veil. One elder priest, Nabaman, trembled before the altar of Osiris and confessed, "In the dream of last night, I saw the Lord of the dead. He did not come crowned, nor clothed in glory, but scattered in pieces, as Set once left him. Each limb glowed like a star, and each star became a soul that walked away from us. When I woke, I found my acolyte gone, his bed empty but for a feather. I know now, the vanishings are not theft, but transformation." The high priests debated this vision. Some dismissed it as madness, warning that such words could sow unrest. Others listened with furrowed brows, for they too had begun to dream of Osiris, not enthroned, but walking silently among the dunes, his gaze fixed beyond the horizon. As the rituals faltered, the people grew restless. Offerings still lay upon temple altars, but many wondered aloud, what good is bread to a god who calls his servants away? What good or chance if silence is hollier? In the hidden chambers where only chosen priests gathered, a darker whisper rose. Some feared that Set, master of disorder, had slipped his hand into the land once more. "The silence is his trap," they murmured. "He lures them into the desert to break them, as he once broke Osiris." Yet others countered with equal conviction, "No, this silence is Osiris's path. To resist it is to resist the truth." Thus, even within holy walls, certainty shattered. The temples, which had long been pillars of order, now trembled with doubt, and through the incense smoke the silence itself seemed to listen. Beyond the markets and temples, the villages of Kemet bore the silence most sharply. Here, where daily life was woven of harvest, weaving, marriage, and song, the vanishings struck like a missing thread in a tapestry. The absence was intimate. A farmer named Menhu returned at dusk from his fields to find his wife's loom still humming in the breeze. Shuttle resting mid-thread, she was gone, the half-finished cloth like an unfinished life. Children searched the banks for her footprints, but the reeds yielded no sign. Menhu stood before the empty loom and wept, for the silence of the house was heavier than any flood. In another village, a mother who had gone to fetch water from the Nile did not return. Her daughters found the jar upright upon the bank, filled to the brim, yet untouched. It was as though she had lifted the jar, heard a call none else could hear, and set it down before stepping beyond the veil. The villagers gathered each evening to tell such stories, voices hushed as though afraid to summon more vanishings by speaking too loudly. Around the fires they whispered, "My brother vanished while tending goats. His staff was found leaning on a stone, but the flock was untouched. My sister disappeared during the festival. She was dancing, then gone, as though she had twirled herself into another world. My son woke from a dream shouting Osiris's name. Before dawn he had vanished, his blanket still warm." These were not tales of theft or blood. No one heard cries, no one saw struggle. Each disappearance was like breath slipping from lips in sleep. The villagers argued among themselves. Some claimed it was punishment for sins hidden in the community. Envy, lies, secret violence. Others said it was a blessing, that those taken had been chosen for holiness. One elder woman, her eyes clouded with age, said softly, "It is neither curse nor blessing, but the way of Osiris. He calls those whose ears are open. The rest of us, who hear only the market and the laughter, cannot yet follow." But grief was heavier than wisdom. Families left behind wrestled with anger. If the gods are just, why do they steal mothers from children? Why take a scribe from his students, a singer from her kin? What justice is this silence? Thus the villages found themselves torn between awe and sorrow. They lit lamps at crossroads, they burned incense to keep Set at bay. They sang lullabies louder into the night, as if to call the vanished home. Yet the silence grew, and the villagers knew that no song could bind those who had touched eternity. It was through dreams that the first pattern began to shine. At first, families spoke little of such things, fearing ridicule. But as the vanishings multiplied, more and more confessions spilled forth, and the fragments aligned into a hidden song. Those who vanished were not seized blindly. They had been touched beforehand by visions, dreams luminous as fire, heavy with symbols older than kings. Always Osiris was present, though never the same. Some saw him crowned, his green face calm as a harvest field. Others saw him torn and scattered, his limbs shining like fragments of the night sky. Still others saw only his eyes, vast and unblinking, watching from the duat like two stars upon black waters. A potter, before his disappearance, told his brother, "I dreamt I was clay upon the wheel. A hand spun me into form, but then crushed me again. Out of the shards rose Osiris, and he whispered, 'To be broken is not to end. To be shattered is to begin anew.' When I woke, I felt the clay beneath my hands was no longer real. I knew then my time in this market was ending. A priest's apprentice, trembling before his master, confessed. Night after night I walked a corridor of reeds. At the end was a throne, empty. A voice rose from it, saying, 'Come sit where no one dares to sit. Come see the world from silence.' I am afraid, yet I cannot resist." Within a week he too was gone, his sandals left at the edge of the fields. Even children spoke of such things. A girl of 9 years told her mother, "A man with skin like stone and eyes like rivers carried me on his back across the desert. He sang no song, but I heard music in his silence. He told me the world is a dream. When I awoke, I wanted to follow him." 3 nights later, her bed was empty. Not every vision was gentle. Some awoke screaming from dreams of dismemberment, feeling their own limbs torn apart, only to be reassembled in light. Others spoke of standing before scales, their hearts placed against a feather, the gaze of Ma'at piercing through them. They woke gasping, ashamed of every lie, every envy, every hunger. For them, daily life became unbearable, as though every gesture dripped with falsehood. The common thread was this: once touched by Osiris's call, the world of the living seemed thin, unreal. The chatter of markets, the arguments of nobles, even the laughter of children, all appeared like shadows on a wall. The dream had tasted more solid, more real than waking life. And so they walked into silence, not in despair but in longing. The villagers began to fear sleep. Mothers shook children awake from deep slumber, whispering prayers, desperate to shield them from the call. But no prayer could bar Osiris from the dream. Thus it was understood, the vanishings were not random. They were an answer to summons, whispers in the night that called some souls to leave the banquet of illusion and seek the waters of truth. Nefru had once been a singer in the temple of Hathor, her voice rising like incense into the painted ceilings, where stars glimmered even in daylight. People said her songs could soothe infants, calm quarrels, even stir the hearts of stone-faced officials. She had been trained from childhood, taught the sacred tones that aligned with the movements of sun and moon. To hear her was to feel the world itself drawn into harmony. But Nefru's song began to falter. She confessed to her closest companion, "When I lift my voice, I hear not music but sorrow. Every note is laced with the cries of those who pretend to rejoice. I see their laughter is painted, their dancing is escape, their prayers are stitched from fear. To sing among them is to drown in lies. My throat closes, my chest burns. I cannot sing." Her words troubled the priests, for song was central to worship, and her refusal struck at the heart of ritual. They urged her, "Nefru, do not forsake your gift. Hathor blessed you to raise joy among men. If you fall silent, who will stir the people to devotion?" But Nefru shook her head, tears tracing her face. "It is not joy I raise, but distraction." They clapped their hands, not in truth, but in denial. "My song has become a veil over their fear of death. To continue is to betray the vision I have been given." Her vision came in dream. She told it openly, though many called it dangerous. "I stood upon a stage of sand. Around me were the people, laughing and clapping. Behind them, a vast darkness stretched, filled with shapes of sorrow. Osiris appeared before me, his body gleaming green like young wheat," he said. "They ask you to sing over their wounds, but wounds must be faced, not hidden. Your silence will speak truer than your song." When I awoke, I could no longer sing. And so she left the temple. At first, people thought she was ill, her voice lost. But when they passed her dwelling, they heard only silence. No humming, no chant, no melody. Some mocked her, calling her ungrateful. Others feared her, whispering that silence itself clung to her like a curse. Yet a few listened closely, and when they did, they claimed her silence was deeper than any music. One farmer who visited her said, "She spoke no word, yet in her gaze I felt as though my heart was weighed. as though every lie I had ever told rose like smoke around me. I wept, though she had sung no note. Her silence cut sharper than any song. Thus Nephru became a sign, a living parable of the withdrawal. She did not vanish at once, but lived in stillness, refusing all festivals, turning away from the feasts of laughter. People began to call her the silent singer. When at last she disappeared, leaving her dwelling empty, it was said that her silence had simply completed its journey into eternity. Her name remained on the lips of many, not as a singer, but as one who proved that silence itself can sing. Jaru was no priest nor singer, but a scribe, one of those who carried the words of Pharaoh and the decrees of temples onto papyrus, so they might endure beyond memory. He had been trained in discipline, his hands steady as the Nile's current, his letters sharp as chisels. To be a scribe was to wield quiet power. Words became law, records became permanence. Jaru once took pride in this, believing his work anchored the kingdom against chaos. But the vision came. He dreamed of sitting at his writing table, his reed pen poised above a decree. When he looked down, he saw not papyrus but a coffin lid, smooth and cold. Each stroke he wrote carved deeper into wood. He realized the words were not commands but prisons, sealing men's lives into boxes. Behind him stood Osiris, torn yet radiant, whispering, "Each decree is a coffin, each lie is a nail. Will you spend your days sealing souls in shadows?" Jaru awoke drenched in sweat, his hand trembling. The next morning he tried to continue. He copied tax edicts, border reports, lists of tribute, but each word felt like a stone pressed upon his chest. He told himself it was fatigue, but the weight grew unbearable. He began to see faces in the letters, the hungry laborers taxed beyond endurance, the prisoners condemned by royal decree. Each mark of ink became a chain. At last, while transcribing an order to increase levies upon farmers after a poor flood, he dropped his pen. The ink splattered across the scroll like blood. His overseer shouted, "Jaru, what madness takes you? Pick up your pen." But Jaru only whispered, "I cannot breathe." He rose, left the scroll unfinished, and walked out of the scriptorium. He never returned. To his companions he later confessed, "I was trained to believe words preserve truth. But now I see most words are prisons, and my pen the jailer's tool. I cannot copy Pharaoh's decrees, for each word chokes my soul. Better to live in silence than to bury truth beneath ink." Some called him traitor. Others pitied him as bewitched. But among the vanished, his name was remembered with reverence. For Jaru had chosen to abandon not life but falsehood. His house was found empty weeks later. The reed pen still lay upon his table, dry with disuse. On the wall in his own hand, one line remained, scratched in haste. "The truth needs no scribe." After that, silence claimed him. Those who vanished did not depart from whim, nor from despair. Their leaving was born of a wound invisible to the unawakened, the burden of seeing too much, of tasting eternity while still bound to flesh. To awaken was not a gift easily born. It was both fire and knife. The awakened found ordinary life unbearable. Where others saw festival, they saw fear dressed in color. Where others heard laughter, they heard denial howling beneath it. A feast table groaned with roasted meat and sweet wine. But to the awakened, it was a graveyard of hunger, men and women filling their bellies to quiet a silence they could not face. One woman, who withdrew into the desert, confessed to her sister before leaving, "When I walk among them, I feel as though I suffocate. Every word is painted. Every gesture hides a wound. I see their envy glittering like knives, their fear of death dripping from their smiles. To live among them is to breathe smoke. My heart cries for clean air." For the awakened, each gathering was a storm. The chatter of markets clung like chains. The rivalry of nobles pressed like stones. The envy of neighbors clung like thorns. What others endured without notice became unbearable weights upon their hearts. A man who vanished after harvest wrote one last line in the dirt before stepping into the horizon. "To see beyond is to bleed within. The games of men cut me as deeply as spears. If I remain, I will betray the vision. If I leave, I may preserve it." This was the burdened clarity without escape. They could not unsee what they had seen. Once the veil was torn, illusions no longer offered comfort. The market became a theater of denial, the home a mask of roles, the temple a stage of ritual concealing fear. The awakened walked among dreamers, but the dream had lost its sweetness. Many tried to endure, Some returned to their roles, scribes copying decrees, singers lifting voices, farmers tilling soil. But their strength withered. They grew gaunt, weary, restless. To live as before was to carry fire in their chest with no place to set it down. The choice was stark: remain and die inwardly, or leave and live in silence. And so they vanished, not as cowards, but as those who could not betray truth, even at the cost of every tie to the world they had known. Thus the burden of awakening became both curse and blessing, for though it tore them from all they loved, it carried them nearer to Osiris, whose path is always shadow before rebirth. Among those who vanished were not only common villagers and scribes, but also priests, men sworn to guard the mysteries, interpreters of the gods. One such priest, named Hekenefer, served in a temple dedicated to Osiris himself. He had known the chance of resurrection since youth, had poured libations of wine upon altars, had recited the prayers that guided souls through the duat. To the people, he seemed the model of devotion, yet Hekenefer carried within him a silence too heavy to bear. He spoke before his brethren one evening, his voice trembling in the lamplight. I have walked the corridors of dream. There, I was stripped of my priestly robes. I stood naked before Maat's scales, my heart trembling upon the balance. I thought myself faithful, yet I saw the shadow of pride, the hunger for respect, the fear of being forgotten. I saw that even my prayers were tainted, not sung for Osiris alone, but for the ears of men. When I woke, I knew that my service, though pure in form, was not pure in truth. The younger priests shifted uncomfortably, urging him not to speak further. But Hekenefer's words flowed like water breaking through a dam. I returned to the temple and heard our chants. They rang hollow, like reeds blown by the wind. Behind the incense, I smelled fear. Behind the offerings, I saw bargaining. We do not serve Osiris, we placate our dread of death. We make masks of ritual, but behind each mask is terror. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I could no longer raise the cup, no longer lift the hymn. Some accused him of blasphemy, saying he dishonored the temple. Yet a few wept quietly, for they too had glimpsed what he spoke of in their private hearts. Hekenefer withdrew soon after. He did not rage against the temple, nor denounce his brothers. He simply ceased to come. His chamber was found empty, his robe folded with care, his staff laid across it. No note remained, only silence. One novice whispered later, I saw him last in the courtyard, standing among worshippers. They sang, but he did not move his lips. He looked upon them as though gazing into sleepwalkers. Then he stepped into the street, and I never saw him again. The confession of Hekenefer spread quietly among the priesthood, spoken in secret corners. Some denied it, fearing its poison. Others carried it like a hidden flame, recognizing the same agony in themselves. And so, even within temples, the silence grew born not of neglect, but of a clarity that stripped away every mask until only truth remained, unbearable to those still playing at shadows. Life in Kemet was woven from masks. The farmer wore the mask of duty to field and flood. The merchant wore the mask of cunning, smiling as he bargained. The noble wore the mask of honor, gilded with titles. Even the priest wore the mask of sanctity, polished by ritual. From birth, children were taught which masks to wear, and by adulthood, few remembered where the mask ended and the face began. But the awakened could no longer endure these coverings. The vision of Osiris, torn apart and reassembled, burned away illusions like desert fire stripping flesh from bone. Once touched by eternity, the mask cracked. The farmer saw he was more than his field, the scribe more than his pen, the singer more than her song. Each role revealed itself as costume, useful in the play of society, but false to the eternal witness within. A woman named Senra, who left her family behind, said before her vanishing, "All my life I was wife, mother, daughter. Each role bound me in duties I accepted. Yet one night in dream, Osiris showed me a mirror. In it I wore no names. My eyes burned with a light not given by any man or child. I was not Senra the wife, nor Senra the mother, but a soul vast as the night sky. When I woke, the names felt like chains. To remain was to betray that light." Her words scandalized her village. Some accused her of selfishness, abandoning husband and children. Yet others, hearing her testimony, trembled, for they too had felt the mask slip in quiet moments, when silence fell, when dreams lingered upon waking. The shedding of masks frightened society more than the vanishings themselves. Pharaoh could command obedience, but he could not command authenticity. Temples could demand offerings, but they could not demand truth of heart. To lose workers was sorrowful, but to lose the illusion that all were content was dangerous. The vanishing exposed cracks in the play, revealing that many longed for freedom beyond their roles. One elder remarked bitterly, "These who disappear unsettle us not because they are gone, but because they remind us that we too wear masks. Their absence forces us to ask whether we have ever lived as ourselves." Thus, the silence became mirror and judgment. Those who stayed behind began to feel their masks itch and burn, though they clung to them tightly. For the awakened, however, there was no choice. To wear the mask after tasting truth was suffocation. To remove it was to step into solitude, bare-faced before eternity. And so they walked into the desert unmasked, unbound, carrying with them not shame but the fragile, radiant light of authenticity. To walk through the streets of Thebes or Memphis after awakening was to step into a dream not one's own. The walls still gleamed with painted reliefs, the markets still hummed with trade, the festivals still erupted with laughter. Yet to the awakened, the city seemed filled not with men and women but with sleepers. A man named Kenti, once a craftsman of fine wood, described it thus: "I walked among them as though in a vast chamber of sleepers. Their eyes were open, yet veiled. They spoke, yet their words were like mutterings in dreams. They argued fiercely over matters that vanished like smoke. They boasted of wealth, of titles, of honors, yet I saw behind each boast a child weeping in the dark. To remain among them was to drown in their slumber." Another, a young initiate who vanished soon after, confessed, "I sat at the feast hall while nobles laughed. The tables groaned with roasted goose and jars of beer. They jested and sang, yet in every laugh I heard terror. The terror of silence, the terror of the tomb. Their joy was painted over fear. I could not swallow their bread, for it tasted of denial. To eat was to join their dream. I left the table in tears." The city, to the awakened, was a theater of shadows. Each role, merchant, soldier, priest, scribe, was played with conviction, but the play itself was hollow. Every conversation demanded pretense, every smile a mask, every greeting a denial of death. To the sleepers, these masks were life. To the awakened, they were suffocating. Nefru, the silent singer, once said before her vanishing, "To dwell among them was to sit in a hall of echoes." Their words did not meet my heart but bounced from wall to wall, never touching truth. I longed for one word unmasked, one gesture free of fear, but none came. I realized then I was not among companions but among dreamers, and I alone was awake. This clarity was agony, for to awaken was not to rise into bliss, but to live truth while surrounded by illusion. The city glittered, yet its glitter was dust. The people laughed, yet their laughter was wound. The awakened found themselves strangers in their own homes, exiles in their own streets. And so, little by little, they withdrew, not with curses, not with rebellion, but with silence. For Osiris whispered to them, "Better solitude in truth than company in falsehood. Better silence among the dunes than the noise of dreamers." Thus the city, though crowded, grew hollow. Its streets bustled with sleepers, yet every vanishing left behind an emptiness deeper than absence, a reminder that not all were content to dream. For those touched by Osiris, the greatest burden was not their own sorrow, but the sorrow of others. Awakening tore open the veils of the heart. No longer could they see a smile without sensing the bitterness behind it, nor hear a boast without tasting the salt of fear that fed it. Every gesture carried a shadow, every word a hunger. Nefru, the silent singer, gave her second testimony before withdrawing. To walk in the city was to drown in tides of hunger not my own. A man's laughter clung to me, but beneath it I felt his dread of losing face. A woman's glance burned with envy, and her bitterness crawled into my chest. By the time I returned home, I was emptied, as though I had given my blood to ghosts. I could not bear their unspoken cries. Another awakened one, a former soldier, confessed, "When I looked into the faces of my comrades, I saw not courage but terror of dishonor. Each man's anger was a mask for shame. I felt their wounds in my own bones. I could no longer lift my sword, for every strike was not against an enemy but against a mirror of their own fear. To remain was to bleed endlessly. Empathy, once a gift, became suffocation. The awakened became as vessels too porous, absorbing the unspoken grief of all around them. In gatherings, they felt tides of envy swirl like storms. In debates, they felt hidden rivalries cut like knives. Even in feasts, where wine flowed and drums thundered, they felt despair slithering beneath the laughter. One woman, who later vanished into the desert, described her agony. "In the crowd, I could not tell where their sorrow ended, and mine began. It was as if 1,000 voices clamored within me. By night I lay awake, trembling, filled with wounds, not my own. I begged the gods to close my heart, but it remained open, a gate with no lock. Thus many of the awakened withdrew, not from hatred but from necessity. Their silence was not rejection but survival. In solitude, the storm of other hearts receded, and they could breathe again. The villagers who noticed their absence spoke with bitterness. Why did they leave us? Why abandon their families, their kin? But they could not understand that to remain was to drown. To stay was to suffocate beneath tides of envy, fear, denial, and longing. In the desert, silence offered refuge. No rivalries clung to the dunes. No hidden hungers pressed upon the horizon. Only the sun, the sand, the wind, and within the eternal witness that could finally rest. When the city's noise became unbearable, the desert began to whisper. Its voice was not a command but a summons, soft as the wind that swept across the dunes. To those who had touched eternity, its silence called louder than the drums of festivals, louder than the decrees of Pharaoh, louder even than the tears of family. The desert was both terror and promise. To the unawakened, it was a place of death, where no crops grew, where caravans vanished, where the sun devoured flesh. But to the awakened, it appeared as refuge. In the emptiness of its horizons, they sensed a vastness that mirrored the eternal light revealed in dreams. Karu, who became known as the hermit of the western dunes, left behind this testimony. In the marketplace I wore masks without knowing it. Smiles, gestures, words all became disguises. But in the desert the masks burned away. The wind stripped me bare. Alone with the horizon, I discovered not despair but a witness deeper than breath. The desert destroyed me, and in that destruction I was reborn. The first steps into the sands were the hardest. Families wept at the gates, begging fathers, mothers, children not to leave. Some cursed them as cowards or madmen. Others pleaded with gifts, bread, dates, wine to tempt them back. Yet the awakened could not stay. The weight of illusion in the city pressed too heavily, and the silence of the desert grew too enticing. A fisherman named Powder described watching the exodus. I saw them go out by night. They carried little water skins, staffs, cloaks against the cold. No caravan, no wealth, only silence on their faces. They walked as though in prayer, as though they followed a voice I could not hear. My heart ached, for I knew they would not return. Yet I envied them, for their steps were lighter than ours. The desert was destruction and womb. Its scorching days seared away fear, its freezing nights stripped away pride. In its vast stillness, the awakened felt the presence of Osiris more keenly than in the temples. Each grain of sand became a scripture, each star a hymn. Not all survived. Some were swallowed by the dunes, their bodies never found. Others perished of thirst, their bones left for jackals. Yet even in these deaths, the villagers whispered of holiness. They have joined Osiris in truth. Their silence feeds the stars. The desert was no escape, but a passage. It was the duat made visible, where one confronted not only solitude but Set, the shadow within. Those who entered knew they would not return unchanged, and so the sands of Kemet, once feared as barren, became dotted with hermits, wanderers, and hidden dwellers. Souls who vanished from society but blossomed in silence. The desert beckoned, and they obeyed. The desert gave silence, but silence was not gentle. In the absence of voices, another voice rose. The voice of Set, Lord of Chaos, whispering in the mind. For as the dunes stripped away masks, they also revealed shadows. Alone with the stars, the awakened were forced to face what society had long hidden within them. A hermit who later came to be known only as the Wanderer carved these words into stone. In the desert I heard Set roar in my skull. He told me I was chosen above all others. Then he told me I was worthless dust. He demanded that I return in arrogance or die in despair. Day after day he battled me, not with spears but with whispers. His strength was in my own fear, my own pride. Only when I ceased to resist or obey did his voice fade, leaving me in stillness. This was the trial of silence, to walk not only with Osiris but also with Set. Society distracted with festivals, markets, debates, and quarrels. In solitude, no distraction remained. Shadows rose like jackals from hidden dens. Old wounds bled anew. Forgotten fears stalked the hermits by night. Dreams grew heavy, filled with dismemberment, betrayal, death. A priest who left his temple testified before vanishing. In ritual, I called upon the gods with incense and chant. In the desert, No incense rose, no chant echoed. There I met the god I had fled, Set, not as enemy, but as mirror. He showed me my ambition dressed as devotion, my fear clothed as piety. I trembled, for I saw that I had worn the mask of holiness. Only when I confessed to the sand itself did Osiris's presence return. Set's trial was not punishment but passage. Just as Horus wrestled Set and emerged as reconciled heir, so too the awakened wrestled their shadows in silence. To deny Set was to remain enslaved. To worship him was to fall into madness. The only path was to integrate, to look upon the chaos within and neither flee nor bow, but endure until balance was born. Some failed. The desert claimed them, their minds shattered by whispers, their bodies lost in storms. Villagers told stories of madmen who returned from the sands, shouting at shadows, proclaiming themselves gods or cursing all life. These were the ones who mistook Set's roar for truth. But those who endured returned not as rulers, not as prophets, but as witnesses. They spoke little, for words could not contain what they had faced. Their silence was heavier than any sermon, their eyes brighter than any temple flame. People trembled before them, sensing both the shadow and the light they had embraced. Thus, the desert became a forge. Set tested them, Osiris steadied them, Maat weighed them. Through silence they were stripped, broken, and reassembled. And when they emerged, they bore no masks. At first the vanishing seemed small, a scribe missing from the archives, a singer gone from the temple choir, a craftsman's stall left shuttered in the marketplace. Life continued. Pharaoh's decrees were still copied, harvests were still gathered, hymns still rose at dawn. The absence of one or two could be ignored. But as the seasons turned, the gaps grew wider. Families mourned in confusion, unsure whether to call their vanished kin dead or alive. Merchants complained that scribes no longer recorded their contracts. Priests muttered that the choirs had grown thin, their chants echoing strangely in half-filled halls. Farmers noticed that fields once blessed by hermits yielded less grain, as if the earth itself grieved. A weaver named Anura spoke bitterly to her neighbors. When my sister sang in the temple, the air itself was lighter. Since she left, the house feels heavy. Her silence clings to the walls. Even the children will not laugh as they once did. It is as if the world itself has been hollowed by her absence. Absence carried weight more crushing than presence. For when the awakened withdrew, they did not simply vanish, they left behind a mirror. Their silence forced those who remained to ask, what sickness drives truth away from us? Why can they not stay among us without suffocating? A priest confessed during a gathering. When the singers fell silent, we felt the emptiness in our rituals. When the scribes laid down their pens, Pharaoh's decrees seemed less certain. Their leaving was not rebellion, yet it unsettled us more deeply than rebellion ever could. It was as though the gods themselves had turned away. Even the Nile seemed to mourn. Fishermen whispered that its floods were thinner, its fish fewer. They said the river no longer sang, for those who had once heard its song were gone. Pinra, the fisherman lamented, the water grows still. I cast my net, but the fish do not come. I know the truth. The ones who listened to the river's hymn have gone into the desert, and so the river sings no more. The people grew restless. Some demanded that the pharaoh punish those who abandoned their duties, branding them traitors to Kemet. Others, fearful of the god's wrath, whispered that the vanished were holy, and to condemn them was to condemn Osiris himself. Families wept at night, torn between grief and awe. Absence spread like drought. It touched every hearth, every street, every temple. Yet within that emptiness, a question began to stir in the hearts of the young. Why did they leave? What truth was too heavy for us to bear? The silence became not only loss but seed. At first, the vanishing seemed small. A scribe missing from the archives, a singer gone from the temple choir, a craftsman's stall left shuttered in the marketplace. Life continued. Pharaoh's decrees were still copied, harvests were still gathered, hymns still rose at dawn. The absence of one or two could be ignored. But as the seasons turned, the gaps grew wider. Families mourned in confusion, unsure whether to call their vanished kin dead or alive. Merchants complained that scribes no longer recorded their contracts. Priests muttered that the choirs had grown thin, their chants echoing strangely in half-filled halls. Farmers noticed that fields once blessed by hermits yielded less grain. As if the earth itself grieved, a weaver named Anura spoke bitterly to her neighbors. When my sister sang in the temple, the air itself was lighter. Since she left, the house feels heavy. Her silence clings to the walls. Even the children will not laugh as they once did. It is as if the world itself has been hollowed by her absence. Absence carried weight more crushing than presence. For when the awakened withdrew, they did not simply vanish. They left behind a mirror. Their silence forced those who remained to ask, what sickness drives truth away from us? Why can they not stay among us without suffocating? A priest confessed during a gathering. When the singers fell silent, we felt the emptiness in our rituals. When the scribes laid down their pens, Pharaoh's decrees seemed less certain. Their leaving was not rebellion, yet it unsettled us more deeply than rebellion ever could. It was as though the gods themselves had turned away. Even the Nile seemed to mourn. Fishermen whispered that its floods were thinner, its fish fewer. They said the river no longer sang, for those who had once heard its song were gone. Painra, the fisherman, lamented. The water grows still. I cast my net, but the fish do not come. I know the truth. The ones who listen to the river's hymn have gone into the desert, and so the river sings no more. The people grew restless. Some demanded that the pharaoh punish those who abandoned their duties, branding them traitors to Kemet. Others, fearful of the god's wrath, whispered that the vanished were holy, and to condemn them was to condemn Osiris himself. Families wept at night, torn between grief and awe. Absence spread like drought. It touched every hearth, every street, every temple. Yet within that emptiness, a question began to stir in the hearts of the young. Why did they leave? What truth was too heavy for us to bear? The silence became not only loss but seed.